July 30th, 2017 to order. July 3rd, 2017 to order.
One of those.
Will you please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Weekly briefing.
Cindy got hurt downstairs, so she asked me to read hers from the Chamber of Commerce, so I'm not Carolyn, I'm Cindy right now. Poor thing. Cape Cod 5 is our presenting sponsor for the Port Summer Nights, starting this Wednesday, July 5th, with Thank a Local Hero and Touch a Truck. This week's sponsors are also Cranberry Jewelers, Mad Minnow Bar and Grill, and Snow Goose. Okay, the next one. Country Living Magazine just announced its 23 best small town main streets in America, and Harwich Port is number 21 and the only Massachusetts town listed. So those were from Sam.
Pretty impressive.
Okay, now I'm going to. Hi, I'm Carolyn, the Community Center Director. I just had two announcements. The first one is that we're doing our annual yard sale again, and people can sign up at the community center. And we're having it at Brooks Park. If it rains, it's again inside the community center, but this is usually a great event. We usually sell out of the spots that we have, so just wanted to let people know that they're on sale right now. And the next one is exciting. We have our open house and art show for the former middle school cultural center, whatever you'd like me to call it, I'll call it, starting on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. We'll have some demonstrations by some of the artists inside, and I know people have been dying to get inside and see what's going on there, so we're more than happy to invite people in. Bill Galvin is doing a article on this, so that is on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, July 24th through the 29th, with various times.
27th.
27th, sorry.
It's okay. No problem, Cindy. I mean Carolyn. Thank you.
Carolyn, does that coincide with the burlap and buoys?
It's exactly the same time, so that we could interchange and have a lot of people coming through, and it's a very vibrant place that weekend, but it is exactly the same weekend. Thank you for mentioning that.
Sure.
But now you're going to have to explain what burlaps and buoys are.
I'm going to let Carolyn.
Okay.
Sure, one of the renters that we have at the center, at the cultural center, is they have a event that they do, and they've rented the cafeteria at the middle school, and they bring in other vendors, so this will be a very large day of few days of having people in and out. It's kind of like what we do at Brooks Park several times, the vintage handmade things. So they had one 2 months ago, I think it was, and it was very successful. So this is just another way to get people in and seeing the building, and so.
Great.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Thanks. Wait, John wants me to be him.
I bet. Anyone else for weekly briefing?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'm here as the Cape and Vineyard Electric Co-op, or CVEC, representative. And my primary purpose is to follow up with the alert that you received last week from Leo Kakunis, the CVEC president, who is here. You may have noticed today in the Cape Cod Times a full-page ad in fine print. What that signifies is that following Eversource's revised filing in mid-June of their original filing from early January of a general rate case, that the Department of Public Utilities extended the deadline for parties to either file to become interveners in the case, or for individuals or parties to file comments. And given the extended deadline, which is only until the 10th of July, to file for intervenor status. The Cape and Vineyard Electric Co-op met last Thursday and voted to do so. The reason being that in order to have status to file an appeal against an unfavorable decision by the DPU, to appeal it in the courts, one has to have intervenor status. And that does not come cheap. After much discussion, we decided to commit a substantial fraction of our fiscal year 2018 legal budget to begin the process. As I said, the deadline is the 10th of July. Subsequently, on the 28th of July, there is another deadline, and then there's another one in August. These deadlines have to do with filing interrogatories by parties to the Commission. These are questions asked of Eversource, which they have to respond to. Then additional legal costs would be entailed in being represented by an attorney in the public hearings doing cross-examination. So far, we have committed enough money to start the process, and the reason I'm here tonight is to both provide you with numbers of what the calculated impact would be on Harwich of this rate case being approved as submitted, and to tell you how I voted and how I personally would vote in the future with respect to additional expenditures, but that I want your guidance as to how to proceed in this matter, because the dollars are not small. The Cape Light Compact was provided with a figure for Eversource for what the net metering credits price would be reduced by. It sounds small, 2 cents per kilowatt hour, but it translates annually, given the output of those round one projects, and that's all that's on this list. This is a partial list of the impact on CVEC projects. You can see that Harwich stands to lose almost $135,000 annually. And we've got 17 or 18 more years to go in the contract. So, we felt that at CVEC that it was absolutely essential that we start the process to file to become an intervenor so we can make the case about what the impact would be. One of our members, the representative from Barnstable, is Charles McLaughlin, who's appeared before you in conjunction with the Round One adder and to talk about the real estate tax stuff. And he's a town attorney. The part of the legal argument is that if this rate case goes into effect, it disturbs existing contracts. And according to Charles and other attorneys, that's a constitutional issue. There may be other arguments, but the impact on town budgets is substantial, and that's the principal reason for intervening. Now, my position is that I think I would personally approve drawing some money from our reserves to pay for the additional legal expenses, which could add up to as much as $50,000 altogether. So I'm not here to ask for supplementary funds for extraordinary legal expenses. I want you to understand how we are proposing to spend some of the money that you are contributing starting the 1st of this month in the Round One adder, and point out that just in coincidence of the timetable, in the not too distant future, Liz Argo would be coming around to all the towns talking about continuing the Round One adder into fiscal 19. This is the expenses for each individual town to fight this would just be enormously duplicative, and we thought it made more sense for CVEC to file on behalf of the members. I'd be happy to answer any questions, but I think if you may want to hear from Mr. Kukunis, who's involved in finding out how great the legal expenses are going to be and how far how many dollars are likely to get us.
Great. Thank you, Larry.
Michael, can I just have a clarification?
Go ahead.
The 50,000 is from the CVAC reserve fund, not from the town reserve fund?
No, the estimate is that going the whole route for CVAC might be 50 to 55,000. And we've committed 20 to start.
Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Leo?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Board of Selectmen. I have to tell you that I was not thrilled with this action that the CVAC board took, although I did support it. I was before you a number of times with Liz Argo asking the Round 1 towns to participate and give us a fair payment to exist as a cooperative. Those monies were allocated to our budget and to our operating costs. We will be before you again relatively soon, as Larry mentioned, for FY19, and I just want to give you a heads up tonight on why that is. I personally, as president, will not vote to use any of our reserve funds for legal expenses. I don't think it's good practice, and I don't want to get into it in depth, but we have to have a certain amount of reserves on hand because we pay checks awaiting checks to come in. And for cash flow purposes only, when you look and you see that we are carrying a $280,000 reserve, there's a reason for that. It's an operating reserve. It's not a reserve that we just leave there for emergency purposes. So I would argue, and probably argue very strongly as we move forward on the board, that I will not want to be using our reserve account for legal fees. However, in our FY18 budget, we did have allocated $30,000 for legal expense. And the board last week, as Larry indicated to you, committed me, the chairman, and the executive committee up to $20,000 to begin this filing procedure on behalf of the towns. They felt it was extremely important when they looked at the dollars that the towns, especially the Round 1 towns, and you have the list in front of you, were potentially going to lose this coming year if, in fact, the new rate change was to go into effect without argument. For those of you listening at home, we're looking at probably $723,000 in total reductions to, I believe, 9 or 10 communities that participate in the Round 1. Harwich alone, as Larry indicated, is projected to have a $134,000 loss. So it's a very disturbing situation for me and the board because we were perplexed as to where to go. As all of you know, maybe some of the new members need to be brought up to speed, but CVAC is basically collecting exact amount of money, almost to the penny, that they need to just survive and operate. And that's why we came forward to you to ask for the Round 1 participants to give us a share. I believe it was a ½ cent per ADA, which raised us about $100,000 and allowed us to really cover a lot of ongoing expenses. At no time was that $100,000, when I asked you for it, was that allocated to this particular lawsuit. This is something that's completely unforeseen and has come forward. I do believe that I will be going in front of the town of Barnstable because they also were concerned of the Round 1 ADA. All the other communities were pretty much on board with it because they saw the benefit of having a cooperative such as CVAC. And if there was any example that I could lay out on the need of a cooperative such as CVAC, it is this rate case. As Larry indicated, I think it would be futile for all the communities to hire lawyers and to file individual motions to become interveners when we do have an organization that represents all the towns specifically in this matter. So it just seemed to be the right way to go. As we move forward, I have a lawyer meeting on Wednesday. As we move forward and we discover exactly how much this may potentially cost us, if we win intervener status, subsequently there will be a lot of additional attorney's fees necessary because we'll have to perform not only interviews, but there'll be all kinds of filings that go along with that, filings from individual towns on how this affects them. and one person, one attorney has to collect all those and submit all of them. So it is a disturbing action, and I hope that you will take this very seriously. The only other thing that I would like to add, just to clear a little bit of confusion, because I'm very confused of this rate stuff too, so you're going to get confused more by someone who is confused. Cape Light Compact, an equal cooperative, if you will, participant, this board voted to join the new Cape Light Compact Joint Initiative entity. Cape Light Compact is looking out for the rate and the rate charge and the levelness of the rate charged by NSTAR or Eversource on the electricity. They're not charged with, and I say this with the utmost respect for Cape Light Compact, but it's not in their purview to worry about the net metering credit value. They don't deal in net metering credits. That's what CVEC does. So although you may hear, well, Cape Light Compact is fighting this, fine, I mean, that's great, they are fighting it. They are a intervener. They have filed the paperwork back in January, and they have been approved by the DPU as an intervener. But please remember, their charge is for the electric rates, not the net metering credits. Thusly, that's why we have to file strictly on protecting our net metering credit values. So, thank you.
Thank you, Leo. Questions from the board? Larry?
Leo, you're right. You've managed to confuse me, which this CVAC always confuses me. What's our net metering rate now?
I couldn't tell you. I'm very sorry. I came unprepared to tell you what it is right now. I think Larry expressed that the new rate, the new rate effects is not much, but when you
Because this is
accumulate
not a little
it,
decrease to the town. It's maybe 35, 38%.
it's quite a bit, it's quite substantial.
It's very significant.
It's definitely, yes.
And
I
this
mean, when you
is
look at the
to-
other communities on this list, I mean, Barnstable alone has a number of different sites, and I believe when you add them up, they're well in excess of $300,000.
This is all due to the net metering discussions, not, I mean, reading the paper where they're asking to increase the rates, Eversource.
From what I understand,
That will compensate for some of this?
no, from what I understand, Mr. Ballantyne, there's two areas of the new plan, and because of the pushback from organizations such as Cape Light Compact, Eversource has decided to not seek the major rates and the fluctuations in the rates. So the new filing in June reflected a lower rate and a flatter rate. However, they made up the difference in their money grab, if you will, on lowering the value of net metering credits. So as of prior to June, you probably weren't not going to be affected too much. After the new filing in June now, where they restructured it, you obviously are now going to be affected at the landfill.
It's a troubling direction, because as you ask more and more people move into solar and whatever, you know, the rest of us are paying for that through net metering, and so I can see this increasing all the time.
The bigger concern, which was discussed at the board, was if this is allowed to go through this time,
They could,
you can pretty much guarantee that in 3 years they'll be doing another reduction to net metering credits, and then probably 2 years after that, yet again another one. And basically what will happen in 5 years is there will be a net zero gain for net metering credits.
my point exactly. So why wouldn't we fight this now?
We are. Thank you. CVEC has, as I
But you're
said,
doing it without the legal support, is what you're saying.
no, we've committed $20,000. We are seeking legal counsel. Again, we're moving forward in behalf of the towns. I'm just giving you a heads up that in the event this legal budget balloons, I may have to come before you groveling yet again, for either one of two things: either a direct payment from these communities specifically to the legal fund, if we decide to make up something like that. Again, this has not been, it's been discussed, but it's never been voted, but there's been discussed that we go to each town and say, you know, you're going to lose $139,000, give us 0.5% of that, which would be, you know, $7 grand.
Yeah.
And if we did that to every community, 0.5%, we would raise enough to cover the legal fees. That's one way of asking it. The second may be that if everything goes well, we'll just be before you again asking for your round one adder participating again, as you did last year. Mr. Ballantyne, you weren't here, but the board voted to allow us a 1 year, round one adder half-cent charge, with knowing that we would come back potentially if we needed it in the second year.
Thank you, Leo.
Thank you, Larry. Julie?
So I don't even know if you can answer this, but is the net metering covered in detail in the contracts that?
Yes, the contracts themselves are specific to the net metering credits.
So
yes.
how are they even
Well,
introduced?
you know, I know that Larry has quoted the attorney for the town of Barnstable saying that he feels that because these are pre-existing contracts, that they are covered by law and they cannot be changed. I have not personally delved into the language of the contracts, but having been a businessman for a number of years, know that there are some contracts that allow fluctuations. And I don't know if that terminology is in there or not. If it's not in there, I guess a court would have to rule that it was implied. This is not an easy look by any means.
And so the next phase, if the 20,000's exhausted and you come back, are we looking at, say, another 20,000 till we get to the 50-55, or you think it could exceed that?
Personally, I believe that it probably will exceed $50,000. That's my personal opinion, but I have nothing to base that on other than having just coming off an exhausting legal battle representing the county and knowing what legal fees can add up to.
Okay.
But certainly, and Larry did an excellent job explaining it to you, there's a deadline to file to ask to be either a limited status intervener or a full intervener. We have chosen to ask to be a full intervener. That doesn't mean that the DPU would rule that we could be a limited intervener. Again, legal mumbo jumbo.
Right.
July 28th is a discovery deadline, so if we are ruled a intervener, by July 28th, we would have to submit our discovery, and our discovery would be testimony from the town of Harwich and all these other towns on how this negative effect would be on their net metering values. And then August 11th, I believe, is when we actually file written testimony, and personal testimony can be also admitted. So this is going to move relatively quickly. We will know better on the charges and a commitment to this as we move forward. It could turn out that the DPU rules that CVEC does not have either limited or full intervener status, and then, quite frankly, we will be up the creek without a paddle.
And I wonder if the state will consider the fact that we have the second, highest rate for utilities, in particular electric.
Once
in the
again,
country.
you don't confuse the argument
right,
of rates,
because it's the
which
net metering
CLC has
versus-
been doing a wonderful job doing with net metering credits. As Mr. Ballantyne so graciously indicated, net metering credits is directly related to solar installations across the Commonwealth,
Right.
especially ones done by communities.
Right.
And there are a number of them on Cape Cod. As I'm sure the viewers know and people at home know, we have one here in Harwich at our landfill, and again, there's these here that are listed in front of you.
Thank you.
Janelle?
Leo and Larry, I'm just curious if you know if this is going to affect the private homeowner as well, who has solar panels on their roof.
I don't believe it will, because most of them are direct use. In other words, they just take the electricity and sell it back to the supplier. Basically, am I using the right term, Larry? Behind the meter, I think, but again, I don't know. I know that large communities like yourself sell these net metering credits. And
No, there is a provision in the rate filing that will have an effect on homeowners, and that is, they've introduced, Eversource has introduced something called the monthly, I want to say, well, it's a network distribution charge. The point is, and it's a valid point on the part of the companies, that people who have solar installations and are doing net metering, they have reduced their bills substantially, and as a consequence, they are not contributing much to the distribution charge on your bill. If you're a residential non-heating customer, that's the tariff you have. We're currently paying a little more than 6 cents per kilowatt hour for distribution. That's to recover the costs of Eversource's network, the poles, the wires, the substations, all of that plant and equipment that's in place, whether anything flows through it or not. And so at the public hearings that have already been held on the Cape and elsewhere, Larry's point has been made that the change in the rate structure, and I'll explain that in just a minute, is going to discourage further solar installations, not just because of net metering credits, but they're going to reduce the amount that they're going to charge more on a flat rate basis. Okay, the the MMRC, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting what it stands for. But the point is that those folks have not been contributing because they're not, the company doesn't charge on a flat rate basis for that capital recovery. The only flat rate charge on our current bill is called a customer charge. The average use in the N-Star territory for the Cape and Islands and southeastern Mass is 557 kilowatt hours per month. That's the average. It's much more in some months and lower in others. Obviously, it's a lot lower for our second homeowners who are not here for 8 or 9 months of the year, okay? But all of their costs have been recovered from usage charges. So this rate case makes a lot of changes, and one of them is the customer charge is going to go up. Mine currently is $3.73. It's going to go up to 8 or 9. And they're going to introduce this flat rate charge for customers who are putting power back into the network. Well, as a consequence of raising some money through the flat rate charge, they're going to reduce the per kilowatt hour charge for distribution. It's going to go down below 6 cents. That figure is in the formula that determines net metering credit prices. And it's in law. That's the problem. It's not a regulation that can be changed. It's in law, the formula. So they've changed the numbers. Some people would say they know exactly what they're doing, which is to discourage renewable energy. But because that number is being reduced in the formula, that's why this happens. Now, both the Compact and CVEC attended the hearings in Barnstable. There's another hearing been scheduled for August, I believe, at Cape Cod Community College, where, again, members of the public, organizations will be there to file comments on all aspects. I mean, there were just a whole, I attended, and there were a whole string of people, including from Cape Air and other organizations and individuals, complaining about the establishment of any fixed charges other than the customer charge because of the discouraging effect it would have on further renewable energy installations.
Thank you, Larry. Janelle, you all set?
I'm all set.
Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's actually more of a comment than a question. I mean, it's a cute dodge. If they had to build more capacity, irrespective of whether it was renewable or not, it wouldn't be the ratepayers who'd be paying for it. It would be their stockholders. I mean, so
I'm sorry, say again.
if Eversource or anybody in that business needed to make more capacity available because there wasn't enough electricity in the grid, it would be their stockholders who would be bonding to buy, to make the plant.
Well, it depends what kind of capacity you're talking about. If you're talking
Electrical
about production capacity for power,
capacity.
that's been deregulated. And Eversource doesn't own any of that anymore. N-Star had a choice when the Deregulation Act was passed in 1996 to put it at arm's length within the corporate hierarchy or sell it, and they sold it. So they are a distribution company. If they have to put in more plant and equipment to deliver power, absolutely it will be paid for by the ratepayers. They are entitled by law and by both by case law and statutory law to recover all of their costs that they can demonstrate are used and useful. They get substantially reviewed, okay? They're also entitled to earn an authorized, so-called authorized rate of return on their invested capital. And that's another thing. They're asking for a huge number to be established as their authorized rate of return.
Thank you, Larry. I'm going to cut this off. We're getting way beyond where
All
we
I,
were. Thank
I
you.
did have a question, though. There's an upcharge on the beginning for whomever is delivering electricity into their wires, correct? I mean,
Well-
that's just a yes or no.
Yeah, and let's not,
They're not particularly interested, and it shows up in their plan for network modernization
thank you,
in
Larry.
having
I'm going to end
two-way.
it. I'm going to end it.
Okay.
Town Administrator, Chris, do you have anything that you want to add?
No, I think we need to look at it, obviously. I think that at least the 2 cents of, if there is going to be additional legal costs, that I agree it should be factored over the percentage in which people contribute to and receive benefit. So to the point, if it's $30,000, we would be paying, 10% of that or whatever the number works out to be. But I think as an approach, I think that's at least an equitable approach to take as we move forward. And if I heard right, that the 19 charge, that's the adder that's continuing, does include not just operations, but the legal assessment too, or anticipated legal costs related to this?
We only have in front of us approved FY '18
Right.
half-cent adder, and none of that was allocated to this because, quite frankly, we didn't know about this.
Wasn't aware of it at the time.
I cannot tell you what we're going to be back asking you for in September, but I'm just giving you a heads up. It may just be another half-cent adder to the
For
round one
operations
people,
costs.
and that'll be fine. We can
Right.
maybe use some of that. I don't know that answer at this time, no.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Leo, and thank you, Larry, for representing us. Appreciate it. Anyone else for weekly briefing or public comment?
Public comment, Mr. Chairman, I have a couple of things. I'm going to take a break away from electricity for 1 minute, but I'm going to come back to it. First of all, I know you have a big agenda in front of you, but I wanted to just give you a personal update. A while back, I asked a member of the public who was serving on one of your boards for some correspondence through their own personal email, encouraging this board to get emails out to all participants and people who volunteer for boards. Subsequently, that gentleman did, in fact, meet the requirements, but only gave me emails which reflected minutes and agendas. And I found it odd that in 2 years, there was no other email that went out discussing anything else other than a meeting or an agenda. Subsequently, I asked, and I want to publicly thank a department head, John, who's standing behind me. I didn't get a chance to talk to him out in the hall. I subsequently followed my request up to him, and he subsequently gave me almost 200 emails that were not included in the first request. So once again, I want to publicly thank our department head for taking that time. There was a charge to me, a member of the public, for that service. However, I know that he spent a lot more time than what you are legally bound to ask for me to pay for those documents. But I did give the town a check, and I just want to publicly thank John once again. And I have not gone through all of them, because quite frankly, there are a couple of hundred. But it does, once again, ratify the fact that all people who work for the town of Harwich are special employees, appointed, elected, I don't care, they need to use the town email. So thank you for allowing me to say that. I'll put my electricity hat back on again, and I just want to give the board a very brief update on the dump solar or landfill solar system. We've had a very hectic couple of days over there. You may or may not know we had a brush fire. The brush fire started underneath one of the telephone poles near the transfer station, and by the time the fire department got there, because they were told it was a small, contained little brush fire, by the time they got there, it had taken out probably 2 acres of the side of the hill. I do want to tell you that I immediately dispatched not only the people who own the solar array, but we dispatched a electrician, and the fire did not start from or have anything to do with the solar array, number one. Number two, it also did not hurt the solar array, more importantly. In fact, I've got a bunch of pictures. I'll be happy to share with them, with the board, and certainly Mr. Clark, so he can put it in the file, because, again, we dispatch people out there immediately. There is some other problems going on over there. I will not speak to it specifically, but I know that Link has been having problems with some surges in the transfer station. And I took it upon myself again to dispatch the electricians, and it was completely unrelated. As of tonight, I can tell you that it was completely unrelated again to the solar array, and it had something to do with the transformer, if you will, that has nothing to do with the solar array, but that actually feeds the transfer station. And NSTAR was down yesterday and replaced that transformer. So I believe that problem has been solved. So I just wanted to update the board this evening while I was in front of you, so in case any of the members of the public happen to corner you during the week, you will have an update and know what's going on.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anyone else for public comment and announcement? Can I get a motion on the consent agenda? We're going to hold J,
Can I ask for A to be held too?
and we're going to hold A. A and J for the time being.
Mr. Chair, I move the following consent agenda items. B, accept resignation of Barbara Jocelyn as member of the Architectural Advisory. C, accept the resignation of Liz Groves as a member of the Architectural Advisory. D, approve the reappointment of David Callahan as Real Estate and Open Space Committee's representative to the Trails Committee. E, approve the request for the use of the Chase Fund in the amount of $395. F, rescind the vote to approve the sale of surplus beach sand to all bidders and approve the sale of the sand to the highest bidder only. G, accept donation and gifts to the Council on Aging. H, confirm the appointment of Marie Carlson to executive assistant position at Council on Aging effective July 11th, 2017. I, confirm appointment of Rain Ryder to foreman position in Golf Department, also effective July 11th, 2017. I've been asked to hold on J. K is approve application for annual Aldham Escape bicycle trek by the American Lung Association for September 23rd, 2017.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda minus A and J. Any discussion on that?
Mr. Chairman, it may be good if Chris could just explain the surplus beach sand, because that may sound confusing to people.
Yeah, I may defer to, the harbor master is here, so he can comment a little bit on some of the operational issues we've had with the county dredge.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, John Rendon, Harbor Master. We had the county dredge scheduled to come in and dredge both Allen Harbor and Saquatucket Harbor channels. We were estimating approximately somewhere in the range of 18,000 cubic yards between the two channels. And so we had put out an invite to bid to the public for anybody interested in bidding on and purchasing sand. We had several bidders, and based upon the volume that we were anticipating, we presented to this board the contracts of those private parties who put in a bid to purchase. We did Allen Harbor. We pretty much completed Allen Harbor, but in the process, the county dredge had a mechanical problem that took a couple of days to get the part in, and then they ran into about 5 days of poor weather that delayed them further, and so they essentially ran out of their window in order to spend in Harwich to complete Saquatucket Harbor. Saquatucket Harbor, we do have kind of a high spot in the channel just south of Buoy 2 that obviously I'm concerned with, and I'm concerned mainly from the ferry's perspective and some of the deep draft boats. That's why I had them come in. It wasn't a huge volume, but it's a volume we needed. And part of that was going to be going to some private homeowners, and it just didn't happen. So we did Nourish, Greyneck Public Beach, Earl Road Public Beach, Wauwatosi Public Beach, and we put some sand on the high bidder, which was Windermere Bluffs Association.
Thank you, John.
Yep.
Answer your question?
Yeah.
All set. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Now we'll take up A.
I know I can be a pain about this stuff, but minutes matter because as soon as we accept them, they become history. You could pick them up 5 years later and you should be able to tell what happened. I just want to add one sentence into the minutes of May 30th, not to create something that didn't happen, but I actually said at that time that I noted that there was no attachment A and attachment B. There were blank pages for the locus. And I just like the sentence to reflect that there were 2 blank pages where the locus would have been. And with that change, I would move to accept the minutes.
Do we need a second? I second it.
Okay, moved and seconded to approve A, the minutes from May 30th and June 22nd.
I can't make the motion for June 22nd because I wasn't there.
Okay. So can I get a motion from,
Oh, yeah, I was there. It's okay, yes.
okay, so
Take it
everything
back.
stands
Everything
we're all good.
stands. Okay, good.
with the change indicated by Don. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Moving on to new business. Nope, J is off. Okay, new business, potential lease of North Harwich bogs. So on June 19th, I got a letter from a Mark Coleman, who is a farmer in town, expressing interest in leasing the bogs in North Harwich. Amy, do you want to give us kind of a background on, or Chris, do you want to start on that, or you want to have Amy do it?
I'll have Amy start,
Okay.
please.
So Mark Coleman is requesting to lease the bogs in North Harwich.
Yes, so for the record, Amy Usowski, Conservation Administrator. Mark is one of a couple of people who have expressed interest in potentially leasing the bogs, which are under the care and custody of the Conservation Commission in the Bell's Neck Conservation Area, right near where the fish ladder kind of comes in, the Depot Street entrance to the bogs. The Conservation Commission has leased out these bogs for a while now. It's the end. This year is the end of a 10-year lease from Craig Williams, and as of a year or two ago, Craig had informed us that he was not he did not want to renew his lease. Now, this bog, as opposed to a lot of other bogs in town, this bog has a little bit of more management issues. It is part of our herring run, one of our big herring run up the Herring River that goes through the reservoirs all the way to Long Pond. So taking in and letting out water requires a little finesse, and also monitoring and making sure nets are in and whatnot. So it's been something the commission is striving to be better at. And towards the end of Craig's tenure with us, we were working with him to improve that situation so fish would not get stuck in the bogs. And what this prompted when Craig gave up his lease is for the Conservation Commission to try to figure out, do we want to continue leasing these bogs out, or do we want to somehow try to naturalize them? Is there the option, because some of the bogs are separate, you can separate them. Could we do a little bit of each? What would make the most sense? So the commission directed myself to start looking at different options and getting ideas. So we did have Mass Department of Ecological Restoration out this past spring. We also had APCC out, who has been working on numerous they're starting to work on bog restoration actions. Now, let me just preface this by saying, too, that the commission is not sold on either one option or the other. They see the historic value of cranberry operation, but they also see the ecological side of things. So they're really kind of unbiased as to they just want some facts. We're at the point now of kind of needing to maybe spend some money. I've dug some holes there, sent some soil samples off with bog use. Historic bog use, there's concern about chemicals, especially if you're looking at restoration. So we're at the point now where we are starting to need to spend some money, and my commission has a little bit in the wetlands account for such stuff as this, but be looking to speak with Bob Caffarelli to maybe put out a request to some firms to help us out. The commission just wants options, and I think that they would be amenable to keeping it an active bog if we could have a cooperative partnership. And I'd like to thank Leo, actually, for this past year. The meantime, while we're trying to figure out what to do, Leo's been advising us when to flood and when to not flood to keep the bogs viable in the event the commission does want to lease the bogs out again. So the process hasn't been as expeditious as we would have liked it to be, but we are continuing to work on it.
Thank you, Amy. I guess, is there a time frame, Amy? Is there a, I mean, how long is too long to let this bog go before we, and maybe Leo could answer that for us. Certainly growing cranberries in the town of Harwich is very important and part of our culture.
Well, let me preface my statements by saying if you ask 10 cranberry growers, you're going to get 10 different answers. However, Amy and I have been in contact. My concern is trying to keep the weeds down from taking over the bog and killing the vine, and also dealing with a fungus that could hurt the vines themselves. So we now, if you go by there now, you'll notice it is underwater. Our plans are to let it out relatively soon. This water was put on for the purposes of killing the buds. My thoughts were that we did not want to grow a crop there because then we would be faced in September with harvesting it. If you don't harvest the crop, then you have rotting fruit, which again feeds fungus. So there are some growers that think that it wasn't a smart idea to flood it at this time, but you guys called me, so you had my opinion. I think also we need to just keep an eye on, because there is not a running sprinkler system on the bog at this time. We do just need to keep an eye through the summer. If we have a very hot August, it would be my suggestion that we at least fill the ditches to make sure that the vines themselves get a little drink of water through their root system. But I do not believe that waiting this this growing season, if you will, is going to be detrimental at all to the bog itself. I think whatever damage has been done there for the previous years, and certainly it's not since Amy has taken it over. So I guess your question is, how long can we go on like this? We can go on for a while, but it would be my suggestion, only because knowing the cranberry business, that if you seriously want a grower to go in there, you probably would like to have something done by the end of the summer, early fall, so that it will be on the onus of the new leaseor to flood the bogs for the winter, because that, again, is winter damage is important, and that will give them the winter season to, in fact, make the investment on the sprinkler system so it's up and running when the bog comes alive again in the spring. If you wait for the whole winter, I think a grower will be faced with a shorter window of time to try to get all this stuff together. So, again, that's my opinion.
Thank you, Leo.
Okay.
Thank you. We routinely have the topic of management of the Bellsnack bogs at the end of our Conservation Commission agendas, which have been, if you've seen them, monstrous lately. So we have it again on our agenda for this coming Wednesday. I do anticipate we're going to have some conversation about that. I'd like to get some consensus from our board as to what exactly they want in this study, if you will. I mean, and how can the study be comprehensive and look at both maintaining it as a bog and then also looking at it from an ecological restoration standpoint. To that end, what's really interesting actually about these bogs is when I've gone out there, I've seen, you know, a woman standing out in the middle of the bogs with a shovel digging, punching holes, that's me, looking for how deep the peat is and how deep down the peat is underneath the sand, and how much peat is there once you get to peat, because that plays a role in, if you want to potentially do restoration, you want to be able to turn that bog over. So in most places, the peat is only about 2 feet below, which is what you would expect. But in some places, it's 6 inches deep, and in other places, it's so deep I can't dig far enough down with my auger. So, and that's in different pieces of the bog. Kind of the far south end of the bog, the peat is not deep at all. It's close to the surface and it's really thin. That'll give you an indication of what type of habitat you'll have there if you try to restore it, versus if you are closer to the reservoir itself and you have several feet of peat that you turn over, you're more likely to have a wetland habitat if you were to restore it. So we need to look at those things too. We need to know if we are gonna restore it, what's it gonna look like? And what type of management is it gonna require from our department, so.
Thank you. You want to add anything, Janelle?
So Amy, when you say ecological restoration, you mean succession, letting it return to,
It could be anything from letting it naturally succeed, which we've seen that in a lot of places, and sometimes it garners a good result and sometimes it doesn't, and it all depends on what that subsurface is and what the seed mass is in there. But what I'm talking about is like an augmented, I believe what my commission would be looking at is maybe an augmented type of restoration where you play a little helping hand in there to get it to be something or the other.
but not restoring the bog itself. That would be up to the farmer that we would lease
That
it
would be up to the farmer. So the option is to release it and have it be on the onus, potentially, I mean, we'd have to talk about it for the agreement, of that lessee to bring it back into optimal production. That would not be, I don't believe, on us.
And are you looking for a board kind of consensus before this meeting on Wednesday, or are you gonna get the consensus of your commission and then come back to us?
It's land under the care and custody of the Conservation Commission, so,
So it's their decision.
yeah. But, I mean, it was brought to your attention, I believe, by Mark, who I've talked to at numerous times and emailed back and forth, and I understand people's frustration in terms of how long this process is taking. So he brought it to your attention, I'm more than happy to speak to it. I'm more than happy to speak to any of you if you have any questions about it, but I'm not really looking for anything other than, if you have some guidance, I'd be happy to listen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Don, anything?
No.
Julie?
Well, can I just ask one thing is, if it restores back to its ecological state where, like, you didn't augment that treatment and it was no longer a bog, is it still then considered, depending on how that evolves, a wetland?
It depends. So, it is a wetland.
It is a wetland.
Well, I mean,
That bog is a wetland.
Okay, all right. And does that either
part,
either
well, the part by
option?
the road is,
Yeah.
the far south part, not as much.
Yeah.
It's getting some oak saplings coming up.
So does either option
parts of
affect
it.
the herring with any kind of?
You could essentially, well, you'd have to shut off flow, we'd have to look at the stream dynamics. If we shut off flow, how would that affect the bog and how wet the bog would be? If we kept flow going, how does that affect the bog in terms of its wetland characteristics and also with the fish? Right now, the management issue is, I mean, having at times a good number of fish, and it's not through anyone's fault. I mean, they could slip through and get in the bog. It's when, you know, Mass Division Fisheries and Wildlife gets upset about it too. When we accidentally catch herring in our bogs.
Right,
So
thank
it
you.
all depends. I mean, and Leo knows far better than I do about management, and he has probably a greater history with those bogs than I do too. But it all depends on how you manage that stream.
Okay, thank you.
Larry?
I have a clear bias, and so I will not speak.
Okay. Leo?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something for the public record. I'm sure if you put this bog out for a lease, it's going to go through the 40B procurement laws, and I just want to be on the record is that I have absolutely no interest in leasing this bog. That's why I feel very comfortable working with the town on this. And in fact, I'm sure Amy will be calling me about putting some words and language together for the potential lease if she decides to do that. But for the record, I am not and have no intentions on bidding on this. And I thought that would be, I'd like to have that in the record.
Thank you.
And that was the reason why I contacted Leo. And other than his knowledge that we know is great when it comes to cranberries, that's one of the reasons I contacted Leo. Leo had not contacted me with any interest to lease the bogs, whereas other people had contacted me with interest. So when I looked for input, that's why I went to him.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Amy, I know it's not in our jurisdiction. I know you're really not looking for any input, but farming is clearly an important part of the town of
Absolutely.
Harwich. And people pay to go on bog tours at one bog in
I
town.
agree.
So it brings people to the community, and I hope that the commission at least takes that thought seriously now while there are people that want to rent it before it goes too long.
Absolutely, I agree. And like I said, I don't think their mind is, just because they're Conservation Commission doesn't necessarily mean their mind is skewed just in the one direction.
Thank
So,
you.
And
Thank
he
you.
obviously spoke to my bias.
Can we get a letter out to Mark Coleman just explaining that, or maybe a phone call, Amy, just explaining where we're at in the process since he took the time to put that into
I'm
writing?
happy to email him,
Thank you.
and I could copy Chris or you, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
So you close the loop.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is letter, discussion on fixing staggering terms and potential of too many members on the planning board. This request came in from Don Howell. So Don, I will give this to you.
I have the current status of Larry, Mr. Brophy, if you'd like a copy of this. So is,
Also in attendance, Larry Brophy, Chair of the Planning Board,
and Linda Sabula, member.
and Linda Sabula, member.
I have it.
This is the one that the clerk and I went over. Actually, let me start with the fact that this isn't just something I came up with this in the past week or so. There's 3 people in the room who know 3 years ago I spoke as part of the Charter Committee that this is something that needed to be fixed. And in a meeting with Mr. Clark and John Giorgio, when I pointed out that this was the case, there was a fair amount of consternation on his part because it is not properly organized under the charter, and that alone could cause somebody to appeal something and have it overturned just by it not being in accordance. We can't exceed our authority as a board to appoint, was the major thought. Before everybody gets really scared, the 60-day period is up on any of these actions over the past several years, so it isn't, it isn't a hot button item this second, but it's going to be one at some point. Now, going back to 2013, the then Board of Selectmen appointed David Harris as an alternate with a term that was a balance for 1 year. The records indicate that in 2014, the then Board of Selectmen appointed him without reference to alternate, and his appointment letter likewise had no reference to an alternate. So I've got both of the letters from the town administrator's office, both in 2014 and 2013. May 21st, 2013, they welcomed him to a term for unexpired to 2014 as an alternate member. By 2014, that was dropped. This past year, we reappointed him again with no reference to it being an alternate position as a reappointment. The town clerk's office, I mean, based on what she swore him in as, has the records that I just gave you. That's the accurate accounting, because you can't change this based on practice and what you were calling that individual. That individual actually converted out into a full member after the first year, 2013.
Is there a question in here?
There isn't yet. There's a statement, though. With that action, there are currently 8 full members of a planning board that the town's bylaws afford 7 for.
Mm-hmm.
So you're oversubscribed.
Actually, you're incorrect.
Okay, Larry, go ahead and speak.
Tom Stello has been reappointed, hasn't been sworn in. So as of now, there are 7 members of the board. Tom Stello, I spoke to him, and he agreed to become an alternate member.
But you don't have that authority.
Only speak when I say.
All right.
We're not getting out of hand here.
Okay.
Tom Stello would have to resign, first and foremost. He would have to do a formal resignation. Just because he wasn't sworn in, we've been through this for quite some time now, of people not resigning and then us trying to get them out at a later point.
Okay.
So that's number one. So the fact is, we have 8 members sworn in to a 7-member board. That's undisputable at this point. Don, go ahead.
The second layer of this is, when you count based on the 8, in 2018, there is 1 member expiring, 1 position expiring. In 2019, there were 6 positions expiring. And in 2020, there is one position expiring. And I can't emphasize too much, especially to the public who may be listening to this, there is a vast difference between a person and a position. The person occupies the position. The positions exist through the charter, and they have to be at a point where they alternate. It should be 2-3-2, based on a 7-member board. That is not currently what it is. So when I had the discussion, and Mr. Clark was in that, I proposed to John Giorgio that in exceeding their authority, it's not that a charter change has to happen, it's not that somebody has to be requested to do this. Those positions on their face were void because the Board of Selectmen exceeded its authority to make the excessive appointments in that year. There are 2 paths that we can go on, but no matter what else happens with the alternate and full-time person, this board would have to first void whatever the requisite number of people would be in the oversubscribed year, and then after that vote was taken in the same meeting, reappoint them with the correct expiration dates. And that would be under our purview and authority because they actually were never valid appointments. But again, an appointment starts here.
Right.
It gets validated by getting sworn in. And those 2 actions are central to becoming an actual voting member at any board. My problem is that this isn't the only board. I asked to bring this forward because
The only one on the agenda.
it's
Okay.
the only one on the agenda, but I brought it up because it was a regulatory body, and I'm slogging through the regulatory bodies first because those would be the most pertinent ones if somebody were to appeal something.
And thank you for the work. So we have the problem. The chairman he's pointed out a solution. Do you have it, I mean, you know the problem, Don, do you have a solution drawn out for dates yet? Or do we want to
I
come
do.
back to that?
I'd like to come back to it, but frankly, I did come up with a template for this. In thinking last in, first out is one mentality. When the board appointed Linda Sabula to the full position, there were 7 members already. So prospectively, one solution would be to move her to an alternate and to change one other person. I arbitrarily chose Alan Peterson to change that from 2019 to 2018. That brings you to 2-3-2.
Okay.
That's not the only solution, but that's one.
Okay. And the chairman just proposed another. Tom Stello would resign to the clerk's office, and then we could appoint him after the fact as an alternate, or we could just,
We'd still have to change the dates of the others.
and then change the dates.
He'd be all right with that.
Okay. So why don't we draw this out, and we'll bring it back to the next meeting written out as a vote. In the interim, I'd like Larry, the chairman of the planning board, to be involved in this. Julie, you are the liaison to the planning board, and Don, you did the work, so potentially the 3, you have a conversation and outline this, so we can vote something through to fix this problem next week. Larry?
So we're just looking to get a 7-person board.
Correct.
And if you use the last in, first out, I was appointed after Linda, from alternate to full member. So,
Well, that's not my proposal.
Okay.
And your
Okay.
proposal was another one, but I'd like you to work with Don and Julie as your liaison, come up with what you want. I mean, you should have a say as the planning board chair.
okay, because, at this point in time, we're looking at a fair amount of work, and 2 of the members, for a variety of reasons, have had difficulty making meetings. They both get there when they can, but, obviously the paycheck in your pocket is more important than the volunteer work for people. I can understand that. So as a result, I look forward to getting the people on the board that we can get the most free work out of.
Chris, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just, in terms of having people kind of void the term and then create the new term, I guess I would suggest that we just take a corrective action. So if someone was appointed for 19 and they should have been appointed for 18,
Yeah.
that it would just be a corrective action vote. That way there would be no continuity question. I think that, I make that suggestion as a...
Don?
Through you, Mr. Chair. We could do that, but we could only do it for one person because the other one is also one of the 2019 people, so you'd still wind up with an unbalanced end date. We could take one action tonight, but that would still put us at 2-4-1.
Chris?
Well, no, whatever corrective action, I guess what I'm saying is if you want to move a 19 to an 18, then do the 223. I get that piece, so you'd want to do that and then decrease the number to 7. In terms of, because this material was not included in the package, I do suggest that, a recommendation and have it in the package so that way the community knows what we're doing. So when that corrective vote is taken and the resignation or whatever to reduce the number, that be put on for, I don't know how quickly that could be accomplished, but.
I would suggest that, if you're putting on for the next agenda, depending on advertisement time, you do it all in one action. I mean, you wouldn't want to drag out like that, drag that out for 6 months, do it with one. It's really a corrective action.
The next
No
meeting is
prohibition
week from
against that.
Monday, right? That's quick.
Larry, can you work with Don this week?
Sure.
Okay.
Because we need to have that by Thursday for the posting, so it has to be Thursday at noontime, and tomorrow's a holiday, so. Just
If not, we can
Just
put it
laying
on
it
for
out.
the following meeting, but that'll be the beginning of August.
Yeah.
No.
end of
End of July.
End of July.
But if you guys can get it done over the phone,
That's fine, because we can, we can stagger the terms. I'm not all that concerned about that. That's merely changing dates.
so we'll leave it as you and Don are gonna talk, and we'll have it on the next agenda. Is that acceptable? All set?
And Julie?
Yeah.
Okay. And Julie?
I would ask when you come back, just for me, clarify the void versus reappointment, that discussion.
Yeah,
I
that's
got a
why
little-
I
I got a
wouldn't,
little
I wouldn't
confusing
use
to
that
me.
terminology. I think to Don's point is that if you make an appointment and it should have been 223, to stagger.
Right.
The charter says it has to be staggered. If we inadvertently didn't stagger it, now we're correcting that. So making someone from a 19 to an
Okay.
18.
So you come back with the correct
It's a simultaneous
the
action.
language. I was getting lost a little bit in that part of it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm not, the staggering, that's just a matter of record keeping. I'm not all that concerned about that.
Okay.
Okey dokey?
Thank you, Larry, and then once we
Okay.
get this figured out, will you make sure everybody, even the alternates, are sworn in and have taken the ethics test for us?
We can do that.
Thank you.
Have a 5th on the 4th, folks.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, on to C, letter to elected delegates regarding wastewater funding. Before Peter Hughes left, retired, didn't rerun, he had requested that this board take an action and get a letter to our elected delegates pertaining to wastewater funding.
Okay.
Chris, you and I talked about that. Do you want to take the lead? on
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hughes did have that as a request. Since that time, included in the state budget is a provision for the Airbnb tax, and that it's my understanding that in the state budget that will come out as a local option, and that money, and this is the part I'm not 100% sure of, that money could be specifically directed or used towards wastewater-related issues. So to the chairman's point, I don't think it makes sense really to send a letter saying, well, you should take an action. An action's already been taken by the legislature. And I think if the board wanted to send a letter of, we do support this approach and have the funding related to the revenue be directed towards the wastewater funding and wastewater issues, I think that may make some sense.
Larry?
I agree with what Chris has said, because I've heard this, I've heard this discussion, but it's almost been more of rumor now than fact that they're going to do this.
Well, actually,
And
just
it's in a draft, but I think we should ask them, just as you said, we can send a letter saying go ahead with it.
yeah, I don't want to throw under the bus, but Representative Peak, when she brought this up to me, she said that she thought this would become operative law.
Right.
So I think it's,
I still would be
On
it's
its way to
different than
fact.
is, so
Yep.
it'd be good to have a supporting letter.
so maybe, Mr. Chairman, if you want to, we'll draft a letter and under your signature, send it to the legislative delegation supportive of that concept.
Board's okay with that? Julie?
Well, I guess my question is, we've talked about this in the past when Peter and Angelo were on the board. So are we being asked to endorse the Airbnb tax in terms of it coming from the state? Because we were originally talking about that on a local basis. I'm not in favor of it
Neither am I.
That's a good
at
question.
all. So I
And I'm
personally.
mixed, actually, But it would seem to me we could phrase a letter if it goes, we want money, I don't know.
Well, I think that raises a
I think there's
different,
other ways
raises
to
a
look at
different
that.
point.
that raises a different point, because originally it was a local initiative. Do
Right.
we want to be party to a local initiative and join with other Cape communities? Now that the legislation is apparently on the verge of being adopted, I think the question really for the board is, are you supportive of that legislation or not supportive of the legislation? And we shouldn't write a letter of support if the majority is not in support of it. So maybe trying to get additional information and bring it back then, Mr. Chairman, if that's, because it does seem to be a split opinion.
Don?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just a little concerned because I got a phone call from somebody who was at the county level that maintained that we were unanimously in favor of this.
Yeah, I don't know.
The fact is that it was said, so something needs to happen to follow on with that. If we're not in favor, we need to be explicit that we're not in favor, but they said unanimously in support.
Julie?
So I have a question on, too, that we, why are we writing a letter before it is a law? Why are we writing anything?
I think to the chairman's point, Mr. Hughes had brought it up and said we should take an action to say that wastewater is a $220
Right.
million issue, and we'd like to have funding help from the state. So, I mean,
No, no, I understand
the
that part. I
terrain's
guess-
changed.
I guess I'm saying, so based on the fact that we're kind of having difficulty grappling what, as a board, then I guess my thing is I'm not in favor of writing a letter until we see it to become a law, and then say those are monies, or we can have our legislation drafted as such so that those monies can be geared to that if it passes. But, that's up to the legislature. If they're going to pass that bill and our representatives want to work into that legislation, that those monies could be somehow earmarked for wastewater, I could understand that. But I don't see a point in endorsing something before it's a law, and taking away that ability to have that conversation.
Thank you. Leo?
A lot of moving parts on this one, and thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to speak. Given aside whether you support or do not support a local room tax being added on to the homeowners that rent out their houses, that in itself is one argument. But really, buried in this is a twofold thing, and someone had mentioned the local initiative. And certainly, if this legislation is passed, that the town of Harwich can decide whether it wants to move forward and tax homeowners that are renting out their homes and get that tax back here, so that you could budget that and use it for whatever you want, is one scenario. Another scenario is that the state just go ahead and taxes all these Airbnbs they're being referred to, but a lot of them are just homeowners that are renting for a couple of weeks, and they collect the money, and then it goes into their coffers, and then they decide what they want to do with it. And I assure you that if the state gets this money, they're not going to give the majority of it back to the town of Harwich to use your wastewater issues. The current financial situation in the state is pretty clear that they will use a lot of it for making up their shortfalls in their own budgets. So there's a lot more to this. I would encourage you, before you write a letter, that you really understand what you're supporting and not supporting. There was talk about the creation of a wastewater fund, but it was unclear to me at the county level when I researched that how that fund would be expended. Would it go back to the towns percentage-wise to how much was raised in that town, or would it just be open for grabs if in fact this fund had $5 million in it and Harwich needed $3 million? Could you apply for $3 million? I just used those numbers. Nothing connecting it to what Harwich actually put into the fund. A lot of moving parts, a lot of unknowns, and again, I would caution you before you write any letters at all that you really find out where the state legislation is going with this, in which scenario they're going with it, skipping over the fact on whether you actually support a Airbnb or a homeowner room tax or not. Thank you.
Thank you. Don?
Just in furtherance to what Leo was saying, so everybody understands this, there is a rooms tax for like a Holiday Inn or whatever. Currently, less than half of that comes back.
Right.
More than half of it is collected by the state, they keep it.
So, and also, in terms of whatever we would do if, on a local basis, if it were left to us, or even whatever way the state decides that we're supposed to collect this, or not, if they're gonna collect it, that's one thing. Who's the enforcer? And how do we do that across the board? So we say, okay, well, there's this tax, and you've registered your house, so we're gonna collect that tax. There's gonna be a bunch of people who haven't. So it's really not a fair tax. And if the state comes about and does it and mandates it, we still fall into that problem of how is the money getting collected fairly?
And do we get any?
And do we get it? Right. But
Okay,
even on a local
We're gonna bring
basis.
this back because we're getting way outside of topic. Okay, next up is amend original vote of the middle school use time period. So on June 13th, 2016, the previous board voted to a 2-year use policy for the middle school. From that June 13th date until we started renting rooms, we've lost a fair amount of time. So this agenda item is to open discussion on extending that time period so we get a full 2 years of use, so that we can really show the taxpayers with some renters in there, which I believe the middle school is now almost full as of last week.
2 rooms left.
2 rooms less.
Almost full.
So I'm bringing this back so that the board can entertain the idea of extending the 2-year date from June 13th until at least we had some occupants in the school. We lost a few months really to planning and use agreements. Julie?
I'm in favor of extending. And when we said there's only 2 rooms, is that including the second floor too?
Yeah, the second floor really went up pretty
That's
quick.
great. No, I'm totally in favor of that.
Larry?
Yeah, I'm going to take another view on this. I'm going to oppose this at the moment, and that is I appreciate the work that's been done and the great publicity and how the rooms have been used. I'm still looking for basically financial accounts on this, what the revenues are, what the loaded expenses would be, including the use of other department labor. I think with a year, we should have enough to at least put together a pro forma revenue cash statement to see how we're projecting the progress going forward. And I think we probably know enough now to put together a capital plan for that building. My view is that this looks like it's going well. It's an important project, but if it's going to cost money, I think the town residents need we need to be transparent on this, know exactly what the costs and benefits are going to be. And I think we're at a point, even though it's 1 year, to put together that information. So, my view.
Thank you for that, Larry. Really, what I'm asking and what town meeting ultimately supported this year was giving us the 2 years to see if it worked. And I know we can't continue on with no financial statement, but just last week, I believe we rented, within the last 2 weeks, we've rented the bulk of that building, really. Or definitely the upstairs. So to create a financial plan, we could either pull one out of the air like we do on other projects, or we can use an actual number, which is what we're creating right now. So without data and without using the space and without collecting the money and paying the expenses, we can only project. So I'm asking for the board to consider, and I think you just said your position, some time so that we can actually give those numbers to the residents rather than just pick them out of the air. Chris?
I do think, Mr. Chairman, in terms of this endeavor, it's been a while. We finally now have it almost fully occupied. We have a rate structure over the last year. Town meeting did authorize the creation of a fund to be able to allow us legally to segment off any of the revenues that are created. So that doesn't become operative, or it didn't become operative until really July 1st. And with the changeover in accountants, obviously that has had a little bit of a delay as well. But I think that what this action would be is that now that we're basically fully occupied, we still have a few technical corrections that we need to do. A couple of examples of that. The Recreation Department has a revolving account, so when they run their program in there, I can't remember what's the popular one that pickleball, thank you. So when they run pickleball, right now, there's no room assessment to recreation. So everything is just going in, and there wasn't a fund, everything's going into recreation. So we do have to have a meeting internally. I did talk to Eric the other day about establishing a room rental fee, so each program participant would contribute to the upkeep and maintenance of the building. So I think there is some work to do, but, you know, one of the things when this was drafted, you know, a while back, was we didn't know the building would fill up so quickly. So I think the idea behind this was, let's see what level of interest there is in the building to see whether it makes sense or not. So now that we've got that assessment by people actually signing up on the dotted line, we now are in a place to start to collect data. But at least in my experience, you know, it doesn't really hold any value to collect data while you're in a transition point, because you're not going to get good data. So now I think we are closer to the point where we can collect good data for 2 years and then report back, you know, is the building going to be self-sufficient? Is the building going to need some level of subsidy? And if so, approximately how much? And then, quite honestly, a bigger discussion for the board is, you know, if we like it as an artist colony, if it is sustainable and we know what the revenue source is, that should also then drive what amount could we sustain as an offset to renovations to it. So if the studio space works, then we would design renovations to promote studio space for artists. And if, you know, that's not the direction the board wants, you know, I sit on the technical school, I mean, you have to know what you're designing, what you're improving before you come up with a plan to make those improvements. So I think the 2 years would give us a good opportunity to see that in action.
Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The one thing I'd like to add to this relative to a pro forma is, whether the building's closed or not, the one thing I looked at, and I used to be a professional contracting officer, is that we agreed with the Monomoy School District to pay for half of the active sewage remediation plant there, for half of the costs. So if the building is not occupied at all and we're not contributing anything at all, we still are nonetheless on the hook for half of the operation and maintenance of that system. So when we get to a pro forma, I just want to caution everybody that if it doesn't look financially great, it's because we're stuck with overhead that even if we had nobody in the building, we'd be paying for.
Julie?
All right.
You're all set?
Yeah, I'm good, sorry.
So I guess the ask here is, do we want to use July 1st as a, I mean, we need to pick a date. Originally, it was June of 16 that the board voted to use it for 2 years, or come up with a policy to use it for 2 years. Now the ask is, now that we're renting it, changing the date so we get 2 years of use. So I would say the town meeting, when town meeting supported that, or July 1st, as Chris mentioned. But I would entertain a motion if someone wanted to make a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion. I move that we move forward to amend the original vote of the middle school use time period for an additional 2-year period, going from technically June 13, 2017.
Why don't we say July 1 of 17?
So
through-
July 1, 2017 to June 30th of 2019.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to extend the use of the middle school from July 1st, 2017 to June 30th, 2019. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
I remain opposed because I still want to have, I don't think we need to wait the full time to get an idea of what's going on.
Well, I think we're going to bring just
And,
as a-
and,
as a
and I'm
sub-
looking for some data points coming in. I know the business I've been involved in, I had to put together for bank statements, you know, pretty complete. And it wasn't picking from the air, but it wasn't concrete either.
So 3-4, 1 opposed, abstentions?
Yes.
Janelle abstained. 3-1-1. And just a point on the data points. We've talked about this from the beginning of this 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. We should start to be able to collect some data, I would imagine. Thank you, Carolyn. So as soon as we can start getting some numbers to the board, And Chris, I know you said you worked with Carol on that. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we have that laid out. The one thing, when going through the minutes, there was a discussion too about the two trailers. And the board officially voted to dispose of those two trailers. If we didn't dispose of them, to have them carted off. I think we were trying to be patient and understanding the county had expressed an interest in those two trailers. So we disconnected the water for the fire system.
Chris, I'll bring this back just because it's
But-
not detailed on. the-
Yeah, I think if we put that on the agenda, that if there is an interest in keeping those two portables and renting those out, potentially, we would just have to reconnect. And I'm not sure where the county is in terms of their ask originally.
Yeah, go ahead.
Officially, the reason why the county didn't act is because of the ongoing lawsuit at the Fire Training Academy. It was the county's position to use those at that facility. Now, subsequently, as you probably all know, having read in the paper, that lawsuit has been filed, has been settled, I should say, and the county is moving forward with its plan on a lot of construction and upgrade, if you will, at the Fire Training Academy. So with that said, Chris, I'll get back to you with an update as soon as I have one and can be able to report some dates to you.
So I'll put this
Thank
back on the end of July.
That's fine.
Wait for this. Thank you. Next up, FY18 Selectmen Goals and Objectives. So I sent these to each individual board member about a week ago, completed. There's 3 different outlines in there. There's, or 3 different versions in there. One is a simple outline with the 6 goals and the objectives. The second is a mid-level with some detail. And then the third one is a high level, which has the actions and deliverables, and it's very broken out to what we want back for work material. So I'm gonna open this up to discussion from the board, and I'm gonna start with Don.
It's like
Since you weren't part of it last year.
It's like tag.
Actually, you know what? I'm gonna open it up to Chris first. Just to have Chris's thoughts, so that the 2 new board members can hear what Chris's thoughts are.
Yeah, I had an opportunity to go through the material. Obviously, it's a very ambitious schedule. I know this past year was an ambitious schedule. Administration and the finance team and the department heads, I think we made a real good effort to get as far as we could. Obviously, again, I guess the same kind of counsel a little bit that I had last year. The more I can have some kind of prioritization, just from discussion with the chair this morning or this afternoon, wastewater in and of itself is going to be a huge effort. There's a lot of different moving pieces, doing the design in East Harwich, doing the interconnect with the Chatham folks, and kind of getting that underway. Is going to take some time. Cold Brook by itself is going to be an effort. So having, a fairly broad-based number of goals, several of them last year were kind of board goals versus ones that administration or finance or the applicable department head, and maybe we can do something similar where we kind of do a who's assigned to what, I think is how that migrated last year. But, I get it that, it's a heavy work plan. I think that a lot of this is doable. And I guess I would just ask for some kind of level of prioritization. And certainly we can make some suggestions as we did last year.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Don.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to preface this by saying I did this when I was with the federal government for the entire unit that I managed, and I was a program director in New York, so we had about 32 people. Typically, even more than prioritization, you're looking at about 2 pages max of goals and objectives, and you're looking to weight them for those things that even if you succeed in everything else, that you failed if you haven't succeeded on these 2 or 3 things. Just off the top of my head, that would be communication, money, and wastewater. If you failed in any one of those areas, then there is nothing you could do to make up for it in any of the other areas. There are position standards, if you will. So you take the job description and you get standards like 90% of the time you you communicate well, or to be able to get to at least a 3 out of 5. I think that the first one I like the best, I mean, if only because it's succinct but I would agree with the chair who has said in the past that there should be some deliverables associated with those, 3, 4, 5 goals. But again, they should be weighted somehow so that everything isn't as important as everything else.
Janelle?
I like the last one. I'm a detail person, so I like that the details are all spelled out as far as what exactly we're looking for documentation, for deliverables. And I know it's a lengthy document, but it's also a working document that doesn't always get completed. Just like last year, I like the way that Charlene created a spreadsheet, and we can certainly do that with this. Even though there are these details, the details can kind of be in the background, and then the spreadsheet can be the weekly meeting tool that we use. So I like the third one.
Thank you, Janelle. Julie?
I would agree. I like the third one too, because I like the detail that it spells out. I also think it's a helpful tool. I mean, to your point, Don, and I understand what you're saying about weighting them, and I certainly understand Chris's point about prioritizing them. At the same time, I think that a lot of what we're spelling out here pinpoints other departments and other layers that are also responsible, and helps Chris really ultimately say, well, this is what I'm looking for, and these are the deliverables I need to, provide to the board. So I think in one way it's a good reference tool for all of us. I also think it more so clearly spells out what we're trying to achieve, and maybe gives all of us a better idea of where that information should come from. Overall, I think that, we can certainly decide as we move forward if we want to prioritize certain things, like, so let's just say top 5 or top 10, just, to simplify it. I think we could certainly do that, but I also agree that it was helpful to have the spreadsheet to go through and to see, where we were lagging in some information, or where we were kind of getting off track with something, and to kind of realign. So I like the last one. I think it gives us the best sort of roadmap.
Thank you, Julie. Larry?
Michael, first off, I very much appreciate all the work you put into this. Gosh, yeah. It's a ton of work, and I know that because it wore me out just going through it. And I didn't write it. I struggled a little bit, I guess, between the points that you guys pointed out, because I was trying to straighten my own mind. What was our objective in doing this? Is it a performance review versus is it informational? Are we trying to keep track and communicate to the public of where we're going with this? And so I looked at it and tried to put that in some type of framework that I could move ahead in when I was looking at this. And so for me, I almost I hate to kind of clutter this up, but I like the first one, the outline. If we were to add to that from the detailed, what would be the one item, or maybe 2 at most, in each of these goals that we'd be looking at the town administrator's performance? So we have a clear understanding going forward of what we're measuring Chris on, quite frankly. And then the detailed objectives I felt were very good in keeping us on track of going forward. So I was trying to split it in my own mind of how we would use this going forward. So I was kind of going both ways. I hate to say this, but going both ways on that. And when I looked at the outline, just a couple general comments. I like, for instance, increased S&P bond ratings. That's an example for me, though. I'd like to have some specific targets that we're looking at. What's percent of stabilization?
Not to interrupt, did you look in the
You have that
actions and
going forward,
deliverables?
but I'm just saying that's be one I'd pull forward as a measurement goal, as you would. The other one, this is more of I guess, just overall management. I don't, for me, I don't like the terms support and report. I think the way we're organized in town, we have a town administrator that's managing the town. There's responsibility to get, to do that, using the various department heads. This kind of makes it feel like it's a group activity. And it is, but it's one through assignment, you know, rather than individually, because we're not, you know, the only one who reports to us is Chris. And so I just wanted to clarify that in my mind. But again, my main point is I was trying to use them, I saw them as being two purposes, quite frankly. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you. So just quick to Don's point, you know, Don wanted to have less. And to Chris's point, Don wanted to have less and by priority. To Chris's point, he just said he wants the board to prioritize so that we have a level 1, level 2, level 3. Larry, to your point, the support and report, we're tasked at the end of the year with reviewing the town administrator. And in that review, we're supposed to review him on management. And I found no way to review him on management since we're not involved in day-to-day business.
Yeah.
So some of these goals and objectives are actions that he's gonna have to give to his department heads and bring us back the work material. So
Correct. I
it
agree
gives
with
us
that.
it gives us an ability to actually manage them, to give him a management grade. You know, it's funny, on all 3 of these outlines, and last year was an extremely painful 1-month process where we really dove into this. At the end of the day, there's 6 goals. And there's 19 objectives this year. Last year there was 16. I could go back, spend another 2 hours and eliminate everything in here that somebody else is gonna have to do, the board's gonna have to do, and that Chris is gonna assign to people and/or are part of our charter. So if you notice, some of these goals and objectives are strictly charter-driven. So I could take those out and I could get it down to a much smaller level. But to last year's point, this gives the public a roadmap of what we're doing. This gives a direction from the board on how we want things done. And then to Chris and I, who didn't agree on this last year at all, I'm telling him, I've worked with Chris now for 3 years. And for 2 of those 3 years, Chris was given a bad performance evaluation. And part of my reasonings for giving him a bad performance evaluation was because of the work material that were brought back on basic goals. How do you grade somebody on a basic goal? If you give him a basic goal and say, come back, and he does the work, how do you give him a bad grade on it? And that was his point to us. If you give him actions and deliverables, exactly what you want back, we're helping him. We're telling him the work material that we want. So in my mind, going to the high level, and we agreed last year that it was not possible to finish all of these, and Chris didn't finish them all, but he got 5 out of 5 good reviews because he demonstrated that he almost completed the entire list, plus extra stuff that we put on it. The work material was good. It gave him a roadmap. It gave him a roadmap for his assistant and for some of his department heads. And again, some of this stuff is called for by the charter anyway. So we can overcomplicate this and write it again. We can pick the 6 goals and 19 objective outline and then have no definition of work material. We could do a combination of each. But what's the difference between that and actually listing out the actions and deliverables and giving ourselves a basis to grade the man on? And, you know, Chris could argue now, I guess, but it worked out for him. And we had a good year.
Yeah, just to that point, you know, I'm fine with the detailed, the 2008 goals and objectives detailed version. I'm fine with that. That will be a work plan. We'll put it into the action item register that we have, and then just we'll allocate who's doing what, so that way there's a sense of what ones I'm going to be giving direction to. I guess my point is, you know, if I focus my efforts, and I think this is maybe where Don was going, if I focus my efforts on, you know, making sure that we move and progress in wastewater, and that tends to be my focal point. I mean, I think I had said to the chairman, you know, I used to gauge how many extra hours I did a year. I gave up doing that because it's just too depressing. But if I'm going to be out 3 or 4 extra nights, you know, in the course of a month, I did it on wastewater. And, you know, if the priority is wastewater, then I'll do that again. If the priority is, I don't know, you know, auditors, then, you know, if I'm gonna dedicate 3 or 4 nights, my point is I can't, there's not enough time in the day for me to go to extra meetings to cover everything. So if we give that priority and we lay out, these are the ones that I will be focused on, and move towards, you know, achieving, then, you know, I'm content to lay that out.
Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I have 2 points. So I tend to agree with Larry. But that doesn't mean that if the deliverables are tied, that all deliverables are equal. And that's kind of what Chris was saying. So that there are deal killer deliverables. If you don't do this, then I don't care what you do with the rest of your time in the office, you're done. But if you weight the deliverables within the goals so that you can come to an easier conclusion when you're actually making out the evaluation at the end of the year, because some of it is for the public to follow along, but let's be honest, some of it's to grade the employee. So everything isn't equal, everything else. But the second point, and I gotta be totally naive about this, I'm just asking every member here, have we ever gone to the MMA to get a model goals and objectives from across the state?
I've gone to about 30 different towns.
Okay, so you've gone to towns, maybe not the MMA, but you've done, I mean,
Oh, yeah.
you've done a lot of work. I mean, and again, Larry's right, you should be applauded for all this. It's a daunting task. But I agree, I'd agree with the third one, but only to the extent that the long list of deliverables has some sort of weighting to it, so that some things are more important than other things.
So might I make a suggestion that we vote whichever one we're gonna do, and that once it's populated into the spreadsheet like it was last year, then the board will review, make recommendations on priority, and then we'll move forward.
Yeah, I could go with that.
Can I get a motion on this?
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve let me cite it properly, goals and objectives in the 2018 goals and objectives detailed actions and deliverables format, which is the 12-page document.
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve the high-level FY18 Selectmen goals and objectives. Any discussion?
And the caveat being that those will come back to us for weighting, as we talked about.
Yeah,
Okay.
will. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, unanimous, thank you. Discussion on weekly communication memo to the board from administration. Some of the comments in the performance evaluations pertain to communication. As I've stated, Chris had a good year with communication, or a much better year with communication with the board. I did look at some other towns. Brewster sent me, by request, what they do. It's in your packet. Basically, the department heads outline what they're working on, what they're doing. Administration does the same, and then it gets sent to the board. I would say that we put it in the packet so the public can see it as well, but it's just another effort for the board to know what's going on in town, what the departments are doing, and for better communication with the town administrator. Chris and I in a meeting today, Chris, and I'll let Chris speak for himself, said that he reviewed it, didn't necessarily have a problem with it, but it is more work, and asked that maybe we start it in August. With that, I think I'll start with Chris.
Yeah, just in terms of it, I know I was asked by a previous member of the previous board to do monthly reports. I did institute that, and we did keep up monthly reports. I would say, you know, from my perspective, that was probably, you know, a couple hours worth of work. So I've kind of gotten away from doing that and decided to try to expand the amount of information I do on under the town administrator's report at the meetings. I'd just like to have some time. We have a department heads meeting, I think, not next week, the week after, and just to kind of walk through with the department heads what the expectation is, and then the mechanics. Just thinking about a little bit this afternoon, as we prepare the selectmen's package, maybe we can do a separate package that would be weekly reports, and then individual departments can submit their kind of what they did, the same flavor. And from an administrative standpoint, if each person does their own, or each department head does their own, and sends it in, I mean, it's gonna be, at minimum, think about it, it's 22 pages, 22 different departments. So it's gonna be a fairly lengthy document. My only objection is I don't think it's cost-effective for the town to have me go and recap for an hour or two a week to do everything I've done. So if I can do similar to what Mr. Embry does over in Brewster, I mean, he had 2 or 3 points that he put on there. If I can hit the high points, then I'll certainly hit the high points for myself and do something similar for the departments. Those that have a bigger event coming up and want to detail it, have this as a vehicle to do so.
Thank you, Chris. I'm going to start with Julie.
I'm in favor of this type of a format. I think it helps us understand where we don't go around to the various departments. It gives us a better idea of, you know, what they're dealing with and what the issues are or what's going on in the status. So I'm in favor of this kind of a report. And I think that in some way that also, again, Chris, helps you because it shows, gives us sort of a weekly update and maybe takes a little bit off of you.
Larry?
Yeah, I think you could reduce the, my grammar's not right, onerousness? Of the, whatever the word is, if it were just very short, a couple of dot points. But I was the culprit who brought this in to Chris a few years ago. And my objective at the time was actually a little bit different than this. It was partially to inform us, the Board of Selectmen, but I also felt that a lot of times the department heads kind of get lost in the shuffle. And I was hoping that if we asked them to give us an oral presentation, not every month, but on a rotating basis, so they'd come up like every quarter or something, would give us just a brief update of what the department's doing, that would help us keep informed, not on a weekly basis, but on a consistent basis. But I was also looking for, as I said, as a way to give the department heads a chance to stand up and brag about what they're doing. They're obviously not going to stand up and talk about whole series. I wouldn't, if the department head, I wouldn't tell the problems. I would brag about what the department's done. So my objective was a little bit broader than what this was.
Thank you. Janelle?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, Larry, about having a rotating basis of department heads, maybe 2 a month, if there are 22 departments. And I like the idea of having the email communication weekly. I think Fridays is good, rather than putting it part of the Selectmen packet. Is that what you had maybe suggested, Chris? Putting it as part of the packet?
That's what I was thinking, yeah, time it to that.
I liked, was it 2 springs ago? It was 2 springs ago. You did a Friday update for a couple weeks or a month or so. And I kind of liked that, rather than clutter up the Selectmen packet and just keep it as part of mail. That would be my suggestion. But definitely have the department heads come in on a rotating basis and present.
Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've kind of vacillated on this myself. All I can say is that this would make you the collator-in-chief. I don't anticipate that you would write a recap for everything that's going on, because it's what the department heads are doing. As a matter of fact, the Peter principle would clearly indicate that that's the best employee. I mean, the best guy in the town administrator's office isn't the best employee in town, it's management. I mean, so you really do want to, we have no direct path to department heads. So I'm not even sure that 2 a month would be a good idea. I kind of like this, but it doesn't, I don't see it creating a huge burden at the administrative level, because it should be succinct, maybe a paragraph or 2, but it could also be an opportunity. I know Larry's probably right, you're going to want to trumpet the good stuff, but maybe you're saying this particular thing's got an impediment built into it and I'm having real troubles here. So it would be kind of additive to the department head meeting, but that's oral. I mean, it's kind of like a homework assignment for each department head. Give me 2 paragraphs for a month, 2 months, whatever it is you're talking about. And where are you? What have you done? And you have any problems that you'd like help with? And then he just slaps a letterhead over it that's, my employees have given me the following.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the format that Brewster uses basically is they email in, and they cut and paste the emails, and they all go into one form. you know, my sense of this is for us, we'll know what's going on. But if we also put it either on the website or in the packet, the public can see. And I think it's a great way for the public to see what everybody's doing and not to add to Chris's work, so.
So my point is, he wouldn't have to rewrite all of
No,
this.
you don't have to
Cut and paste is
recap
great.
anything. No, thank you. So acceptable
Yeah,
consensus, Chris, good on that?
Yeah, so we'll look at the August 1st as the implementation date. Just on those Friday ones, I was asked by the board that anytime I had discussions with the reporter to make sure that you guys knew what was coming out in the press. So it would be dependent upon when the reporter came in. That was one of the elements of what I did. So it wasn't necessarily a Friday report in and of itself, but just
Okay, next up, One Cape overview and discussion. It's nice to see Leo still here, sitting through this meeting. I only went to the dinner and to the Pleasant Bay, the joint town meeting. I didn't go to anything else, so I'm gonna actually let Julie start this.
So the One Cape that we went to on Thursday and Friday, so I went to Friday as well. And first of all, the commission did a fabulous job, and you did, Leo. And I really appreciated your talk about regionalization and things to look to that the county can help us with, because I think that there's a lot there that they can help us with. So, I look forward to finishing my survey. I haven't finished it yet. So, the following day after our Thursday night was our wastewater, and I have done a quick sort of synopsis on this. I certainly have more to do, and I'll circulate it. But to say that the housing session was a little bit shocking to hear some of the statistics is an understatement, and an amazing amount of information, fabulous information. Again, I think most of it will be posted on the Commission's website. But just to give people at home an idea about the various things in terms of housing that we're looking at, the Crane group that did an analysis actually commented that the Cape Cod market analysis that they did was one of the most difficult that they had ever performed. And that's because of the various issues that we have in terms of housing problems, in terms of seasonal housing, in terms of wage gap, in terms of loss of young people on the Cape, and the increasing aging population. And the fact that taking all of those parameters and trying to put them together and look at the housing units that we need, which I believe, I got this correct, which was we're in need of 21,000 housing units for people earning less than $80,000. The $75,000 to $90,000 group, the supply of houses obtainable to this market is greater than the demand, you would think, which would mean that there was an excess of 7,200 units, but it's not true. So you can see why they were grappling with these statistics. So overall, the charge, and I have much more to say about the disparities in the zoning and all of these things, but zoning and the need for density and the need for changing our zoning bylaws was put into us steadfast by each and every one, in terms of talking about how millennials like to live and how we need to draw that young population back to the Cape with, of course, jobs, which that's another thing. We attended Zudi coming back to Harwich, which is fantastic news for Harwich. But also the need that the more elderly population who have four-bedroom homes, who might want to get out of those homes and live more central so that they could walk to things, you know, they don't have an alternative either that's affordable. And when I say affordable, I'm not talking affordable housing. I'm talking about workforce housing. I'm talking about the need for elderly people to have alternatives. So just a quick summary. The need for diversification of our housing, to increase the diversity, independent ownership, independent rentals, retirement communities, assisted living communities, skilled nursing homes. We need to look at the seniors to move to walkable space, open up the housing units, because by seniors having those choices, that would actually open up housing units for people who could possibly afford those units. The other big issue was, and as we go back to wastewater, the sprawl that's happened to the Cape over the last, 30 years, 40 years, since the 80s roughly, isn't working. And the 40,000 square foot lot, as the gentleman from Reef pointed out, The 40,000 square foot lot with the house and the septic tank no longer works. It doesn't work for all sorts of reasons. And the impervious surface that has escalated on the Cape is not due to large developments. It's actually due to the sprawl and the amount of driveways, the amount of patios, terraces, so on, footprint of houses. So all those things need to be looked at when we're facing the sewering that we need to face. And yet, I know that that word density and change in bylaws worries people, but if you actually listen to all the information and really go to the Cape Cod Commission's website, look it up. It's so interesting about what we've done and now how we need to move to correct it. Because the one piece that really stuck with me was, what happens to the Cape after the baby boomers are gone? Who comes to buy those houses if there's no young population here? And people, those properties are only going to go up in value. So who will be able to buy those? And who will be here to support that network? And never mind the need for the infrastructure that we need. And I loved the idea of somehow getting Wi-Fi and getting out of the Comcast monopoly and intensifying our Wi-Fi on a regional, countywide basis. That would be excellent if we could do that. So that's my quick synopsis.
Thank you, Julie. Larry?
That's a great summary. I'm not sure I can add much to that, Julie. Just as a side note, I know a couple of years ago, a newspaper article, not on this, but in terms of housing density for seniors, that there are other areas of the country that are creating villages, and specifically for seniors. And it's interesting to me that we're continually get older percentage-wise on Cape, and yet we still struggle as people are scared of any mention of somewhat higher densities where seniors can walk where they want to go. And in that regard, we're behind the rest of the country. I was second getting monopoly away from Comcast. In terms of the wastewater, I don't know what, I think the take-home, one of the take-home messages that we didn't like to hear was by Conservation Law Foundation, which stated that if we didn't move, they were going to reinvigorate this lawsuit. And words weren't enough. Plans weren't enough. They needed action. In saying that, we're on the action part of that. So take the place of department head, I guess, when we pat ourselves in the back. You know, we've widened Muddy Creek. We've, have an IMA now in places Chatham. So we are moving forward. The downside is Leo's mentioned, I think, several times, there's no magic rainbow that's going to give us a pot of gold to go after this. I did appreciate, however, EPA and DEPA at least looking at providing some funds for, where can we put reactive barriers? What type of criteria are can we use alternatives in, that will at least give us a leg up on how when we plan to go forward. And we have the Southeast New England program, which gives us some funds. And so they are doing a few things. A lot of it's not substantial. And Leo, I too have started the survey, but we'll finish it. And I think the most important part of that survey for all of us, at least for me, is what can the county do to help us? And I think there's numerous things on a regional basis that the county actually can step up and that towns are doing individually, and we could, and maybe zoning is one of them. Maybe we have a zoning guru in Cape that help us put that forward.
Janelle?
How can you top that? I
Tom?
was there, it was good.
Wasn't there, I can't talk about it.
Okay. Chris, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think that, I think you guys did, Julie, you take excellent notes, because I'm just thinking I sat through that housing. One of the things that really impressed me with the housing was that I think it was 71% of the houses are second homes, and I think it was Eastham. And, to me, since I've been down here studying a little bit, and I think that trend of increased number of second homes will continue. So as baby boomers retire off, it's going to be folks that are in that $50,000 to $80,000 range competing against money not just in Cape Cod, but really in a big circle, a big area. And that's of concern, because how do you keep vibrancy in a workforce in a community when you're competing against people that have, quite honestly, more money and resources? So, you know, more effort, I think, in terms of the housing I walked away from. I think Conservation Law Foundation, you know, again, they got to video that stuff where you can get that out, maybe if you know, as that gets done, because they were saying that, you know, too slow, too slow. And I was very proud of the fact that Harwich was named several times as, you know, kind of becoming more of a leader in that, especially and particularly into the regional efforts. So, you know, I would like, just for the commission, you know, I think the commission should kind of come out and have discussions with us, what worked well and what didn't work well, and happy to share that. And then I wasn't aware of some of the efforts that Sandwich was making on that part of the Cape, and I actually saw him the other day, my counterpart, and said, you know, as you get done, we'll provide that at our managers meeting, which is next Thursday. We're going to pass out the IMA that we've had achieved to all the Cape managers that attend. We happen to be hosting next month in Harwich. So we are trying to get that word out of, you know, you can work regionally to solve issues, and this is a regional issue. But I thought it was a lot of good information. I did spend both days there. I don't think I stayed for the lightning round at the very end. These things kind of went pretty late.
Yeah.
But I thought it was a very worthwhile effort. And I do think the commission kind of putting together information on monitoring and what works, that alternative technologies, you know, really needs to be kind of driven home of what are the options so that we can do it. And I didn't realize, I think Paul had said that, you know, there are other parts of the country that are looking to Cape Cod for what we did with Muddy Creek, and even Cold Brook is something that I think has some real merit to it. So I thought it was good, very informative, and I appreciate and applaud the efforts of the county to continue to do it.
So I'm going to open up the next topic, Barnstable County Survey, and leave the other one open, and Leo Kokunis, County Commissioner.
Thank you. I'd like to just also have some comments on the One Cape meeting, too. Thank you all for participating. Our Executive Director of the Cape Cod Commission does an excellent job putting it on, and I look forward to next year's. I think that just a lot of information comes out of it. In regards to the affordable housing, there's a difference between affordable housing and subsidized housing. Unfortunately, under our current zoning laws, the way that a developer can build affordable units is he has to go with a 40B, and under the requirements of the 40B, percentage of those have to be subsidized housing. So as we build these 40B developments and affordable units, it's a double-faced sword, because being affordable units, it opens them up for people across the country if you're taking federal money, certainly across the state if you're taking state money, and quite frankly, and I've said this publicly before, if you're on subsidized housing and your unit is up for renewal and you have a choice to have a two-bedroom home in Brockton and raise your children there, or come down and get a two-bedroom home on the Cape, I'm sure people would love to come down the Cape. And we have attracted a lot of and built a lot of those units here. So zoning is absolutely the key. I've been a huge advocate, and I'm actually asking now the commission and the county to put forth some model bylaws for towns to look at, because you have to remember the county has no restrictions. We have no policing authority. We have no authority on zoning. That's your job, and through your planning board. But certainly, accessory use apartments has been thrown around, and I personally believe it is the only answer that absolutely makes sense. And it makes sense on a number of different levels, because if you have someone that has a four-bedroom house, has a four-bedroom septic system, but they're empty nesters and they're only using one bedroom, they could in fact apply for an accessory use apartment, divide that house up, put another kitchen in, and go from a four-bedroom house to a three-bedroom house, one for themselves, and rent out a two-bedroom apartment. They're not changing the footprint of the house. They're not adding to the zone coverage. They're not adding to new decks. They're not adding septic. Yet it now becomes an affordable unit because someone young could buy that and rent out that accessory use apartment. And it will give our workforce housing some ability. The other thing with zoning, and again, people use the 40B because it's worth their while to build smaller houses on smaller lots, but the downside is the subsidized part of that. So if, when you look around back in the 50s, I mean, I grew up in West Yarmouth, and, there were 10,000 square foot lots, very small homes. We had a two-bedroom, my family still owns it, two-bedroom cottage, typical 1950s, but it was a place to live. And unfortunately, today, I'll use Harwich for example, we have the DCPC, which you have to have 2 acres zoning, and quite frankly, no one's going to build a 1950s small two-bedroom cottage on 2 acres in the DCPC. What they're going to build is these, everybody refers to as trophy homes. So we've kind of shot ourselves in the foot, and I applaud the selectmen for talking about it, and certainly the county for moving forward and coming up with that kind of thing. Specifically on the Conservation Law Foundation, I too was very upset of their attitude this year. I thought they were a lot stronger than last year. Last year they kind of skirted that we were, hey guys, don't relax because we're still here. This year they came out pretty publicly and stated that we were not doing it fast enough, and that kind of concerned me. It certainly concerned the commission and certainly concerned other towns. Another positive end of that was the alternative septic systems. The county, as you know, has been operating a alternative septic system testing site over near the base in Bourne. Has been doing it for a number of years. It is a state-of-the-art facility. It is used now by a number of other states that are coming in and trying these new innovative systems there. And I was very pleased to hear that the EPA and the DEP was encouraging us to do testing, water testing, groundwater testing, around those initiative new systems, if you will, to see if they in fact work. Because we feel, and I know George Herfelder from the County Health Department feels that it may be a 20% factor. It's at least something that would work in 20% of our problems. It's not going to cure everything, but it may handle the 20%. The sewering, like you guys are doing with your first part of town, might handle 20%. And the Muddy Creek situation handles 20%. So altogether, these methods will hopefully satisfy the Conservation Law Foundation. And direct to the request to the survey, I said publicly there, and I'm going to go around and say it publicly a number of times too, I personally believe, as the chairman of the county commissioners, that the county government was established for one person and one reason and one reason only, and that's really to service the towns. Now, there's an argument there, and even my fellow commissioners disagree with me, and certainly members of the Assembly disagree with me. I think even your representative to the Assembly disagrees with me, feels that the county services the public directly. But the truth of the matter is they don't. Okay? We do not have a fire department. Barnstable County does not have a fire department. You can pick up 911 and call. No Barnstable County Fire Department is going to come to your home. Okay? However, we do have a fire training facility that is established and is there to train your firefighters. We do not have a landfill. We do not operate a landfill. We don't sell dump stickers to anyone to our landfill. However, we run a hazardous waste collection thing at your landfill by your request. Does that service the public? Absolutely it does, but through you. And I cannot really stress this enough, because I don't believe that in the past, certainly in the past 8 years, the administration at Barnstable County has not come out and really stressed that I need you to tell me what you want from us. The county commissioners really are looking for guidance from you guys of where you want us to go with this. Every town uses IT. You know what I need at the Barnstable County for an IT? I need one guy. We have, 100 employees. We have a couple of different departments. I need one guy. I don't need a big IT department. But it makes sense to have an IT department that services every single town on the Cape, because you all have the same situation and the same problems. And why every town has an IT person and every town has different things, to me, seems silly. So this is why I'm reaching out to you guys, and the commissioners are reaching out to you to find out, do you want us to look at this kind of thing? Do you want us to look at more regionalizing services? We did buy another dredge. Barnstable County now will be operating 2 dredge. You heard earlier this evening that we had to leave Harwich because of a mechanical breakdown. The current dredge that we are operating is 20 years old. I mean, it's going to break down. It's inevitable. So we have now purchased a brand-new dredge. It'll be online probably in about a month. So I'm looking at, and commissioners will be looking at hiring, yet again, a second crew. We'll be hiring, buying all the other things that go with operating that dredge, and it's quite an endeavor. You have to use the dredge. If you don't use it, it's going to be a bad investment that I supported and my fellow commissioners supported. The health department, I say this all the time. Barnstable County does not send out a health agent to look at your restaurants. It does not approve. It has no authority over your restaurants. It doesn't go out and inspect your bed and breakfasts for their licenses. Your health department does that. But when your health department gets busy and she cannot do all those inspections, especially in May and June, or the beginning of the season, she turns to the county health department to help her out. So yes, we have inspectors on the field, but they're inspecting for you, the town. They're not inspecting. We have no authority to enforce anything. You guys do that. Is that important to you? Do you want to continue that service? That survey is so important that you need to know, and I know all of you know me on the board, and all of you certainly feel, even if we agree or disagree in things, you respect that where I'm trying to go forward, and the commissioners are trying to go forward in our FY19 budget. We need to know now, after this lawsuit has been settled, it's public record, everyone sees that the county's on the hook for $400,000 a year, substantial amount of money. Our budget's not that large. We are going to be looking to tweaking a lot of things, but services to the towns are very, very important to the current county commissioners. That survey is key, and I cannot ask you, encourage you, and for you to call up your fellow towns too and work with them. I know Chris is doing that with his administrators, and the county will be holding a follow-up meeting asking for your homework assignments to come back so we can review them and hopefully move forward on doing a better job servicing you guys.
Thank you, Lee.
Thanks.
When did you want that survey form? Ideally, when would you like those surveys back?
The end of the month. I'll give you the month of July.
Okay.
We can have them by August 1st. That would be great.
And do you have an amount that the town of Harwich contributes to the county now, roughly?
Interesting question. We have, the county has a assessed tax on every single town, and the homeowners will not see it as a line item in their tax bill, but it's included in the omnibus tax that the town assesses to every individual. I believe off the top of my head, the town of Harwich is around $200,000 a year, plus or minus. But please also understand that the county gets money from every deed that is registered at the Registry of Deeds. So if you want a true value on what the town contributes to the county, it's not just the $200,000. You have to also look at what every single deed in the town of Harwich, every transfer in the town of Harwich, has attributed to the county budget. And quite frankly, I think that's over $400,000. So when you add the 400 to the 200, you're talking, $600,000 plus that the town is actually giving us to operate. Probably not as awakening for the town of Harwich, but when I've had this discussion with people from Provincetown, they say, well, we only give you $90,000 a year. I mean, $90,000 a year, we get a couple of services from you, we're happy. But the sale of property in the town of Provincetown, especially now with the rising cost of the property, believe me, Provincetown is up almost very close to what Harwich pays, probably close to $400,000 and almost $500,000 a year. And you need to get services for those monies, and we hope to provide you those.
So this survey is extremely important for the board to fill out.
Just, I don't know, Leo, did you want to say where the annual report, you had indicated that people should maybe review that before doing
Yes,
the
the annual
survey?
report that the county puts out, and Chris has a copy that he's holding up, It's a really excellent written document. I have to say, it's very well laid out. It's not typical of a boring kind of all numbers annual report. It is broken into different categories and tells you what each department does, and it does have all our financial information in there too. Those reports are sent to all the towns, so you should have copies here. They are available in your libraries, and certainly if any selectmen or administrators or even people at home, if they need a copy or want a copy, call the county. We'll be happy to make one available for you, and it's also available online too. And so is the survey, so there's no excuses not to do your homework.
Thank you. Moving on to the town administrator's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have several items tonight. The first one there is on the disbanding the Architectural Advisory Committee. We did get a response back from John Giorgio on that. It was a creature of town meeting that was created by town meeting. It was not included in the bylaws or anything. It was kind of an ad hoc committee, so the recommendation by the attorney is that if the town wants to dissolve that committee or say that it's dissolved because those duties and responsibilities have been absorbed within the planning board, for an instance, that it would have to take a town meeting action. So that would be something for the, the creation of the warrant that we would have to put on. So I just wanted to kind of close the loop. I think that question had come up.
Don, you have something on that?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. I mean, the bigger takeaway to me, especially since he referenced the charter and some other things, it's really actually not as complex as he made it out to be. If it started in a place, it has to be killed off in that same place. So if it started in town meeting, it has to end in town meeting. If the selectmen created a committee that is not in the charter, the selectmen can wind up terminating the committee. And if it is in the charter and we want it to go, then it would have to be an amendment of the charter. So wherever it started, it should end there.
Thank you.
Thank you. In terms of just a couple other things, I wanted to talk a little bit about just some of the vacancies that we have. I did attend today. Barbara Ann Foley, our Council on Aging Director, is her last day. Gail Barnes, the executive assistant, her last day was Friday. Both events were held. I think they were all private. The Friends contributed to the function. It was a nice function, I thought, for both. And just in terms of, I am kind of working through kind of the details. One of the things I will start to establish, I had originally thought trying to do about an hour a day. I'm probably going to have to do a little bit more of a concerted effort. So one thing I will do for certain is Friday afternoons, town hall's closed, the community center and Council on Aging still open. So I'll do that 4-hour block of time as kind of a given at this point, and then we'll kind of carve out some of the time to make a presence down there. And the reason for that, just organizationally, we have 6 employees. We've lost a department head and we lost the primary secretary. So we've really created a issue for ourselves, having both people kind of leave at the same time. I did have discussions just so we can kind of nip things in the bud. That there was no animus between them. It just happened to be Gail Barnes had decided to retire. It had given us quite a bit of notice, and Barbara Ann chose to take on a different career, and that career had a more definitive time that it needed her, for lack of a better expression. So we did have that discussion. Long story short, I mean, I'm going to get down there, and we will commence the recruitment. To that end, we did have, I believe it was in this weekend's paper, the Council on Aging Director position. So if people are interested, certainly encourage people to apply. I think it's a good place to work. Both employees have been down there more than 15 years, so it can't be that bad. So the open until filled, and reviews will begin on July 17th. So just want to encourage folks. We did do an internal promotion that was on the agenda earlier, so we have filled Gail's spot already. I wanted to try to do that as effectively as we can. On the administrative assistant down at the assessor's office, that is out publicly. That closes July 10th, so if you're interested, that's a week from today. We do have built into the budget this past year, paid for by cable funds, videographer, part-time position. That says 10 hours a week. I think it's not as much. And Jamie's not here tonight, but I think she had alluded to that. A program aide, part-time at the Cultural Center for 19 hours. Weight room attendant, part-time, community center, 19 hours. And clerical aide, part-time at the community center, 19 hours. I just want to say, I think it was the clerical aide was Emily Mitchell. And, you know, just here's kind of the reality of this business. Really a super employee, very outgoing, very friendly, very smart. And she had the opportunity to go to law school, so she got accepted to Cornell. So, you know, it's nice to bring in real good quality people, and, you know, you never want to hold people back. But I just want to acknowledge that, you know, good people do apply and can come and go and move on to bigger and better things going to law school. So appreciate her efforts with the town, and maybe that's a future nudge to other people that good things happen when you come to work for us. On a couple other things, just I know we had some issues down at the solid waste operation. We had a technology issue that had us down for a couple days. I do wish to acknowledge the efforts of Link Cooper, and really one of the ones that Link had relayed to me was Sean Libby spent a lot of time working through the technology. It's amazing how almost all the technology today, I mean, it's a simple piston that pushes the trash and compacts it, but it had so much computer technology and something went afoul, so they have changed that. I think we had 2 or 3 days of disruption, but I appreciate Sean kind of stayed with it to shepherd that through. Also, another front, I think it was last Wednesday, I spent some time down at the Coal Brook project. HCT, Harwich Conservation Trust, has reached out to a grant agency through the feds and through the state, and there is a real strong potential that, well, there's a definite potential that we're eligible for federal funds regarding Coal Brook. They have interest in some culvert work and the fish ladders, and there was one other thing which my memory escapes me at the moment. But we are looking at applying for a grant to do some of that work that would help to offset some of the things that need to be done. But just as was alluded to earlier, you know, what happens when a cranberry bog is no longer a cranberry bog and when it diverts to nature. And really, by having the sand layers, and I don't know much about cranberry farming, but the gist of what I got, by having so many sand layers, it doesn't create a very good biosphere for life, and it really promotes just cranberries and weeds and other vegetation. And by breaking up that surface, that we're going to be able to create a better environment to absorb the nutrients and phosphorus and nitrogen, and do that through natural attenuation. And they were excited that, you know, that we were doing that. So as we develop that, we will submit a grant for that, and we'll see how we make out. It is competitive, so we'll see how. And I think the maximum was $500,000, just in terms of scope. The other thing I mentioned to bring up, you know, sometimes you go to these conferences and at the One Cape, and it's not just about the presentations that are done, but it's also the vendors that are out there. And I had an opportunity, I can't remember the gentleman's name from the health department, that talked about the septic loan program. And I know one significant, what was his name? John? George Herfelter. Close enough. So, you know, one of the things that I had a conversation with him, and one issue that came up last year, I'm just pointing to Julie because I know you were at that meeting, heard the same thing I did, that people were concerned about the connection. How are we going to do the connection from my home into the sewer system? And how, you know, is there a way to be able to fund that? And we were looking at, and certainly I know it's on the goals and objectives, how can we fund it? And the county, I didn't realize this, actually has access to those same state revolving loan funds. Sometimes they refer to SRF is what they're commonly referred to. And they have a pool of money, and it's eligible for anybody in the state. Anyone in the on Cape Cod. And one of the things I was thinking about, that there's no need for us to reinvent the wheel, and having them come out and do a presentation. And it's very similar to what we would set up because they're using the same statutes that we would use.
Right.
And the nice thing is they have access to a pool of money that we would not have to duplicate. So I think it would be, and I told him the order of magnitude of the number of people, and that didn't seem to be a big deal. So I am very encouraged by that. And I think to the point of let's try to educate people that there is an option to cover that $5,000 to $7,000 estimated cost to go from your house into the system. So that was actually a great pickup for me to have that information and to learn that at that, and we'll bring them out to do some additional education. And then lastly, just on a good news front, you know, I appreciate that the workforce, we have Maya is our insurance company. Maya stands for Massachusetts Interlocal Insurance Association. And it's basically a group of towns that have municipal representatives that serve on these boards, and they do a rewards program. The more you have an active training program, the more you get credits and discounts. So overall, our premium is around $500,000. And we got about just over $11,000 just in those credits because people go to do the training. And we have hosted several of those trainings. So when departments kind of laugh at me and say, well, why do we have to do all these trainings? It does have a material effect to helping us not only manage the liability, but also saving the town and the taxpayers some money. That concludes my comments this evening, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chris. Don, Selectmen's report?
Nothing.
Janelle?
Just a little community note. I've attended twice now because my daughter is in Anne of Green Gables at the Cape Cod Theatre Company, and I would recommend that to everybody. Really, really well put together show.
They put you to work.
I volunteered.
Julie?
Other than the one Cape that we attended, the Zudi ribbon cutting, when was that, last week? Was it? Wednesday, right? Last week.
It's all blends.
Anyway, it was great to have attended that. Great to see Tom and Trish Kennedy bring a company back here. That was a successful back office company, now leading to Zudi. Hopefully it'll be just as successful and brings jobs to Harwich, so.
Mr. Chairman, I've neglected, ribbon cutting reminded me, we do have the check that will be ready to go for Chatham to pay for the IMA. And I didn't know, I think there was some suggestion made at a board meeting with the other towns. And if the board wants, you know, maybe we'll get a check blown up or something to kind of ceremonially pass that over. But I wanted to at least relay to the board that I think they told me I'd have the check by the 11th. So, you know, we don't have to do it exactly on the same day, but it's something that if you want to reach out to your counterpart, Mr. Chairman, to get some publicity out of it, I think it makes sense.
Great. Larry?
Nothing. I wish I had worked at a place like Zudi with the weight room and the kitchen with the espresso maker and the beautiful working conditions. I didn't have that type of working relationship with it.
I'd like to mirror,
Patriots.
I would mirror Julie's comments, but you know, the Trish Kennedy spoke, and the first thing she did in her speech was she thanked every contractor first that helped them get that building ready. She uses all local contractors, local restaurants to cater her events. She's bringing a lot to town. So DPW, it's important to note that it didn't skip a beat. Link made provisions for residents with garbage trucks. He referred to Sean Libby as a genius. They were only down for 2 days, and it was a computer issue, but Sean was able to track it down, get somebody here to fix it, and the dump didn't skip a beat other than the fire. Don, just wanted to thank you for the work you're doing on the committees, along with Janelle, and it's important for the rest of the board. Larry, I know you're working on a new charge, possibly for wastewater implementation, but all of the committees, all the members need to be sworn in, need to take the ethics test. We need to constantly check on that through the clerk's office. But thanks for the work on the committees. I think that's it. That's it. Motion to adjourn.
So moved. I'll second it.
We are adjourned.